Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for joining. This is the last talk of DevOps. I hope it went great for you. Thanks again for coming to the talk. So today we're going to be talking about building a generative AI app with Firebase and Flutter. Cool, let's get started. Okay, so quick intro about me. My name is Prakhar, and here's my GitHub handle. I'm particularly proud of this animation, but I'm an early engineer on the Project IDX team at Google. I've been at Google for around close to 7 years, where before Project IDX, I was a software engineer on the Firebase team. And since the very early days, I've always been very passionate about open source and building developer tools, and tools specifically that help developers like me make my job easy. And for what it's worth, this is my first time in Europe and having a great time. So thank you, DevOps, for inviting me. It's been awesome. Okay. So today what we're going to do is we're going to build a very simple app. It's a mobile app. And the idea here is a user can input a goal or a task that they want help with, and they can use AI to output a list of subtasks that are useful or that are useful for that query. And as software engineers, I'm sure you all are used to doing this at your work. You get a big task or a bug or a feature request, you break it down into smaller tasks. But for other things in life also, this is a particularly useful approach that you can divide and conquer. And the app that I have for this talk today is available on GitHub. It's an open source app, so please scan this QR code if you're interested in checking it out. But before we go further, I have a few questions, and I would appreciate if people can raise hands. So the first one being, any mobile developers in the audience? Raise hands. I see 1, 2, okay, sweet. Anyone who's written any Flutter code or know what Flutter is, any familiarity with Flutter as a framework? I see 1, awesome, 2, okay. And what's your favorite code editor, like, or IDE? Any VS Code developers? Okay, nice. And who all have heard about Project IDX? Okay, one. Thanks, Guillaume. Anybody else? No, okay, cool. So let's jump into Project IDX. So what is Project IDX? So here you see my editor, and this specifically is Project IDX. Project IDX is a cloud-based development environment in the browser by Google. And our goal is to make it super easy for you to build multi-platform, full-stack applications right here in the cloud. For those of you who have done any kind of mobile development, whether it's Flutter, iOS, Android, you know how hard it is to get everything set up on your computer. You have to download massive binaries, Xcode or Android Studio, set everything up. In Flutter, which is a multi-platform framework by Google, it still takes a couple of hours to get everything set up. But in Project IDX, you see I have 2 Android and iOS emulators running right here in my browser. This will work even if you're not on a Mac, and this feature is coming soon. So this is sort of the sneak peek that we wanted to show for attendees of DevOps. But you can see here that I have my app. It's a Flutter app, which means it runs using Dart code, and it can compile down to Android, iOS, web, Linux, and Mac. So one code base gives you an application that you can export to all 5 platforms. And so the app we are building today, like I said, is called Listed, right? And you'll see here, let's see. Let me ask you the question. So I want to give a tech talk at a conference, right? And I hit enter, and let's say what it says. And it gives me a couple of pointers on how we can get started. So the first one is choose a topic that is relevant, which I did, I think. Write a clear and a concise abstract, which I submitted. Create a presentation that is easy and appealing to follow. I think the jury is still out on that one. Practice your talk aloud multiple times, which unfortunately I did not. Arrive early to the conference, be prepared to answer questions, and make sure to have a backup plan, which is like a tip in case of technical difficulties. One cool thing about this is that, let us say I want more ideas on choosing a topic. So I can click this button, and then it will tell me even more about the topics that I have, right? And this way you can take a high-level task, and for an example could be, for example, writing a memoir, right? So which seems like a very hard thing to do. I can click, and it will tell me the subtask, and this could be very useful for organizing the hard tasks that you want to do in your life. So very simple app. At a very high level, we'll go through how we build this. But before I do that, I want to show you something cool, which is on the iOS emulator. If you see here, this is not some JS hackery or any magic behind on the screen. This is actually an iOS emulator running here in the cloud. So I can, for example, close this, and you'll see the iOS emulator. Let's close this for now. And you'll also see an Android. It is the same. So if I open close, I click this button, you'll see that it's a fully functioning Pixel device that's running right here. So what I can do is I can quickly go here, and just to show you how everything is set up. So for example, here I have my code, and we'll go through a code walkthrough later on in the slides. But I want to show you how quick and how iterative the code development flow is for building such kind of apps. So green is my favorite color. Unfortunately, I'm not wearing it today. But I chose the app color green. But let us say I want to change to something else. Anybody wants to shout a color that they like? Red. OK, cool. So let's do red. And I hit save. And you'll see instantly it changed the color, right? And this kind of UI development where you can change colors, you can do iterative development right here in the IDE without anything set up. Whether you have a Mac, whether you have a Chromebook, or your Windows device, I think that's one of the cool things that we want to do in Project IDX. So if you're interested in Project IDX, sign up at goidx.dev. We are still in very early phases in Google, and our goal is to work very closely with developers to make it super easy to build applications in the cloud. And so with that, let's continue with the presentation, and we'll go to IDX again after a few minutes. Let me click on slideshow. Sweet. So like I said, please scan the QR code if you're interested in testing out this app and modifying it the way you want. But I see a few phones taking a picture. Sounds good. Let's continue. So here's a screenshot, like I said, of an iOS device running within Project IDX for the app. And join the waitlist to get access to Project IDX if you like what you saw. And we'll see more of it as we go through the talk. idx.dev. Sounds good. So what is our agenda for today? So our agenda is going to be, we'll start with talking a bit about generative AI and large language models. We'll then talk about Palm API. And Palm API is an API where you can quickly and easily use these language models in your app, irrespective of what platform or framework you're running on. We'll also we'll then talk about Firebase extensions. And we'll see how we can very easily use Palm API in our apps without spinning up any extra infrastructure on our end. And finally, we'll dive into the Flutter app, which I just demoed. OK, so what are LLMs in generative AI? So I'm sure all of us have used ChatGPT in some form or the other. This is a true story. I used ChatGPT to plan my trip here for Antwerp, like what to do for a couple of days. So there's ChatGPT, there's BART, and there's tons of various language models out there. At the most basic level, large language models are basically like a sophisticated autocomplete, right? So given an input text, for example, you can lead a horse to water. LLMs are supposed to output what is the most likely, statistically most likely text to follow. So in this case, it would be, but you can't make it drink. And this is based on the patterns it has learned from being trained on massive amounts of data on the web, Wikipedia, Stack Overflow, etc. But one could argue, what is this useful for? It's just a sophisticated autocomplete. Well, I'm sure there are tons of applications that you can do with sophisticated autocomplete. You can ask it to generate poetry, short stories, metaphors. It can convert structured data to freeform text. It can extract and summarize information, which I'm sure many of us have done, generate code, and build a chatbot. And there are much more use cases on this guide. OK, so one of the cool things about LLMs, as opposed to other machine learning and AI technologies or developments that have happened in the past few years, is that you do not need to A, collect a large data set, or to train a model. And you don't even need any ML expertise to use any of these features. All it takes for building a prototype is basically just describing what you want the model to do, and the model will try its best to do it. So for example, I wanted the model to write a 4-line poem about puppies and Android phones and make sure it rhymes. And it came back, which in my opinion is a pretty good poem that I'll be happy to print on a t-shirt and wear outside, right? But given that the only input to the model is what you want it to do, it is a very, very important input. right? And this is where prompting comes in. The quality of results largely depends on the information that you provided and how you craft it. So for example, in this case, if I say example for bad prompt is, the sky is, and the model here outputs blue, the sky is blue on a clear day, on a cloudy day, the sky may be gray or white, which might not be what you're looking for, right? A good prompt is, complete the sentence, the sky is, and then the model outputs so beautiful today. So as you can see here, just changing the prompt make the model behave much more in line with what you want it to do. And so we just spoke about prompting. Now let's talk about the two most common kinds of prompting that is available out there. So one is zero-shot prompting. Zero-shot prompting essentially means that the model's ability to complete the prompt is without any additional examples. It's purely based on the data that it has trained on, and that's it. It has to use its pre-existing knowledge to generate a plausible answer. So in this case, my prompt is, classify the text into neutral, negative, or positive, and the text, I give some text, for example, I think the vacation is okay, and sentiment as in a fill in the blank, and the model comes back with neutral. So in analyzing the sentiment of this text, I think the vacation is okay, the model didn't have to look at anything else. It basically is what it's learned about the human language. It has used that to give me a sentiment. The other example is few-shot prompting. Now, few-shot prompting takes advantage of the fact that large language models, or LLMs, are incredibly good at recognizing and replicating patterns in text data. So in this case, for example, let us say I'm building an application where I want to convert Python code to JavaScript code, right? And so rather than just giving the Python code directly to the LLM, I give it some examples. So in this case, I say, print hello world in Python is this version in JavaScript, console log. Similarly, for x in range, a for loop in Python, this is how it looks in JavaScript. And when the user gives its input, I expect the model to give me back some JavaScript code. And so in this case, you can see that the model is going to rely on these examples, but additionally, outside of these examples, also the amount of data that it has learned. And most cases, few-shot prompting turns out to be a very, very valid use case and performs much better than zero-shot prompting. Cool. So now we have learned what LLMs can do for us. There are tons of applications that they can help us build. We've also learned two kinds of prompting, which is how we tell the model what to do, and in return, it will give us the answer that we're looking for. But as application developers, the question is, how do I use it? And that is where something like the Palm API comes in. The Palm API allows developers to use state-of-the-art language models from Google to build all kinds of language applications. And at a high level, there are just two APIs. So there's a chat API and a text API. So let's quickly dive in to see how they are different from each other. So the text API is designed for single-turn applications or interactions. It's ideal for tasks that can be completed in just within one round. So for example, in my previous slide, I showed the sentiment classification. That could be a perfect example for a text API, where I give it a text, please analyze the sentiment for it, and it will give me back a response. And so it's perfect for text completions, summaries, classification, etc. And then there's the other API, which is the chat API. Now, the chat API is designed for interactive multi-turn conversations. And the idea here is that in the chat context, the context of the previous chats that the user was talking about is very important and has to be dynamic and context aware. And so this is where some things like chatbot, interactive tutors, or customer support comes in. So based on this quick differentiation between text API and chat API, for our listed app, what do you think we should use for our listed app? Should be a chat API or should be a text API? Quick show of hands for chat API. 2, okay. And I'm assuming the rest think that we should use the text API for our listed app? Exactly. So text API is the API that we'll use for our listed app. Perfect. Okay. So now we know prompting, we know about large language models, and we also know about the text API. Question is, how do I use it? So I might have a web application, I might have a backend application, I might have a mobile application. In this case, I have a Flutter mobile app, right? And one way to, so at a high level, Palm API is just a REST API. And you would use it exactly as you would do for any other REST APIs that you're using in your application. There is a challenge though. And that challenge is that for the way the pricing model for these kind of language model APIs work is based on every invocation, right? And you authorize to the API using your API code or some auth token. Now, if you inject this, put this auth token in your client app, for example, my Flutter app, then the user can be smart enough to deflate the app and extract that API key and basically give me a $1,000 bill by just extracting the API key and abusing it, right? And so the challenge is that how can I make this secure, but without creating any infrastructure? And that's where something like Firebase extensions comes in. Are folks familiar with Firebase? Okay, sweet, okay. So Firebase extensions are basically pre-packaged solutions that save you time in integrating a run-of-the-mill and quickly adding custom solutions into your app. So what we'll do here is we'll use a Firebase extension to securely call the API. Now, like I said, there are challenges with, ultimately it's a REST API, so you can use REST API the way you call it. But there are some benefits of using Firebase extension. So the first one being that we do not need to expose the API key to the front end. But you could argue, oh, I'll just spin up a backend into it. And that's 100% a totally fine option. But even if you don't want to spin up that infrastructure for doing that, Firebase extensions will spin up cloud functions for you, which are easily configurable and come with goodies such as auth, logging, monitoring, and optionally, they are secured by AppCheck. And what AppCheck allows you to do is to enforce that the client that is calling my backend is the client I trust and not some arbitrary app that has figured out, oh, I can use this backend for, let us say, summarizing text or doing these kind of things. And the best part of this is that this is all super easy to install, and we'll quickly see how. So Firebase extensions, like I said, makes it very easy to interact with the Palm API. Now, Firebase extensions has a marketplace where I can go search for a functionality I want, click a few buttons, and boom, I have it ready to go. So in this example, I went to the Firebase extensions marketplace. I typed Palm that you see on the top, and there are 5 different extensions that are provided by the Google Cloud team. So there's chatbot, there's summarized text, and there are a few other examples. But the one that we need for this example is called the Palm API securely, right? And so what I can do here is I can click the install button. So let's install the function or deploy the function. I click this button to install it in my Firebase console. It'll ask me a few things to authorize and secure. It's basically just spinning up some infrastructure, basically cloud functions, and making sure that you granted permissions. And when I click a few buttons, this page tells me that it is all ready and deployed. And now the best thing here is that it actually tells me how to use it. So it says how this extension works. I'm sorry if the font is too small, but you can see here it actually is giving me some TypeScript or JavaScript code on how to use it. On the right side, you'll see that it has deployed 3 functions, which correspond to the 3 different APIs, that come with this function. So there's a post API, there's a get models API, and a get model API. In this case, we only need to use the post API. And what the post API allows you to do is you send in some text, aka the prompt, and it gives you back a response. And so if you see here, and this is something that we have to keep in mind. So let's jump to the next slide. So yeah, like I said, these are the 3 cloud functions, and the super easy way to call this function is using just this line of code. And we'll see how we can do the same thing in Dart. Okay, so what you can see here is we have 3 functions deployed. Like I said, these are 3 functions that the extension deploys for us. At this point, I haven't written any code. I haven't configured manually anything on my computer, just a few clicks, and the function is ready to go. And you can see here that the ext palm secure backend is the function that we need. And let's now dive into the code. So the first thing we need to do, let's now open. So earlier I had screenshots, but I think since this is a developer-focused conference, why not just go to the IDE and we can just check it out here. So I'll close the preview for now. Can folks read the code okay? Is the font size okay? Thumbs up? Okay, sweet. So the first thing we need to do, let me go one down just to make sure. Okay, yeah. So let's go to API.dart. Right. Now API.dart here is, so Dart is, if folks have not used Dart, it's very similar to any C style or Java style language. It's object oriented, but it does have some functional features. So it should be relatively easy to follow. But again, like if any of this is confusing, please raise your hand and ask questions. Super happy to dive deep. But what I'm setting here is I've set up 3 variables. for what to identify the function. So if you saw my slides, you'll see that it is, quickly I'll go through, it's US West 2. So what I've done here is I've set the region, I've set the instance ID, and the function name. And this is all basically coming directly from here. What I can do now is, like I said before in my previous slide, that let me present so that this size is big enough. You'll see here that this is giving me some JavaScript code on calling the function. Now in my case, I'm writing Flutter, so I have to convert this JavaScript function to Dart, which is also pretty straightforward. So I can just go here, and if you see here, all I'm doing is I'm saying Firebase function, instance for the region, and calling with params. So it's basically just these lines of code that is calling my Firebase function securely with all the benefits that I said earlier. And the question then is that what is the params, or what is the input that we said that we sent in the request? And you'll see here that's just a JSON blob here, that the method is called generate text, which is the way you call the API to generate text. The model name is text bison 001. Now, if you're familiar with the nomenclature of these models, for the Palm API, these models are termed on how big they are, the number of parameters they have. And of course, the trade-off here is with accuracy versus speed. In this case, I chose like a medium-sized model called text bison, where I give it my prompt. So you'll see prompt, text prompt, and then a temperature. And to put it very crudely, temperature is a value between 0 and 1. A low value of a temperature means that it's more deterministic, the output from a model, and whereas 1, it means less or more probabilistic. And what that means is that with a high temperature value, the model gets more creative. So if you wanted to write poems or generate essay ideas or books, those kind of things, that's where a high temperature is useful. But you want something like code completion or, hey, explain this code to me. That's where a low temperature value is useful. So in this case, I just chose a conservative value of like 0.25. And of course, this can be changed depending on your application. So that's the first thing. Now, the next thing after the API is the prompting. And now let me quickly jump back to the slides. Now, like I said before, prompting is the most important step in using generative AI for your apps, because that is the only input that you can give to the model, right? And we talked about zero-shot prompting. We talked about few-shot prompting. And so in this case, we used few-shot prompting. And my strategy here was, let's give this model a few examples of what I wanted to do. My overall task is, if given a query by the user, for example, I want to settle in a new city, it should give me some subtasks and an optional tip, right? And so just because I'm a programmer and I'm lazy, what I did here is I created a prefixes array. For example, you want to, example, this is where the query will come. Here is a list of tasks that you might need to complete for that activity and something additional to consider. And so let's quickly go over and see how this works. So in this case, for example, the task is go camping. So the prompt is going to be, you want to go camping, right? Similarly, you want to plan a family vacation. The next one is subtasks. For example, so you want to go camping, and then these are some of the subtasks that I gave. Choose a campsite, pack clothing, bring a tent, plan pack your meals, and similarly for vacation, choosing a destination, a packing list, research dining options, etc. And then I optionally also gave it a tip. So this combined, so for example, the tip in the go camping is food attracts wildlife, and in the family vacation is when planning activities, remember to allow space for downtime. When you combine this with the prefixes, you can see how the prompt is constructed. So in this case, you want to go camping. Here is a list of tasks you want to consider for completing that activity, and it has these 5 activities that I'm just making a long string. And then something additional to consider that newcomers may overlook is my prompt for tip. Food attracts wildlife, never leave food, etc. And that's how we have basically created the prompt. So if I go back to my code here, and you'll see that this is exactly editor font zoom out just one level. Okay, yeah, so if you see here, all I'm doing is I have a very simple class called a prompt builder, and all it's doing is taking a bunch of prefixes and examples and looping through that. And then I have prefixes here, I have some examples that I have. So I've given it 5 examples, and none of the demos that I typed in front of you are part of the example, so it's not fake, but that's all I'm doing. And now, given that I have a prompt, all I need to do for calling the backend is fill in the values from the user's input, create a final prompt, and call my API with the text, and that's it. And let's quickly jump onto the main part of the app. So for those not familiar, in Flutter, the default, the main scaffolding is a main.dart file, which is where the application starts, and you have a main function where you lay out your UI, you lay out other bits and pieces. So in this case, you can see that I'm signing in. And the signing is just needed so that the Firebase function can authorize. And no worries, users will not see a like a login screen, because who wants to log into an app to just try this out, right? But this is all anonymous login. And so I set up a theme, and this is all material material theming. If you are an iOS developer or a Mac OS Linux developer, you can change all of this to your liking. None of this is like hard-coded or set in stone. I then have a very simple loading screen that you saw. It said thinking. And then my home page is basically laid out very simply as a body, which is a list of tasks, an input text, and an action button to sort of reset everything. Are folks familiar with UI development, either in web or in other languages or in other frameworks? Yeah, so all of this should look largely familiar. It works on a similar model that you have a state. For example, I have some UI state that I can reset, and as soon as the state resets, the layout is redrawn so that the app is re-rendered. Right, so this is where I'm setting some states. I have some debug print statements as purely for my debugging, and you can see here that I set the tip and the tasks from the response. So going back down, I think the only interesting part here is this piece where I have a task item, where I have some children of all those lists that I have. And when I click a list to drill down, what I do is I simply call the onList a callback, and that callback, let's see where it is. Yeah, what the callback does, it basically creates that prompt again and sends it to the backend. I think the other interesting bit is, so it's not the 0 to 8, but the list input, where you ask the user for an item. Like, for example, this is the text input where I ask them whether to train for a marathon. That is the placeholder that you saw, and on submit, it happens. The same thing happens again. So one of the things that I wanted to demo about this, let's quickly stop the debug mode. And so if you noticed, I was actually in the live debug flow for Flutter, which means that I can set breakpoints right within my application, run the code will stop there. I can inspect the variables all within Project IDX. I don't have to worry about setting any of that up. It's all ready to set and go. So let's use, obviously I said generative AI. Let's see, it's 2023. Everybody's expecting some kind of AI in their browser, in their IDE. So I will just click continue, and let's see. Is this text big enough? Yeah, okay. So let us say I invite one of you to collaborate on my app, right? I can do that. I can do Command-Shift-P. And for those who are familiar with VS Code, Command-Shift-P is the command palette menu. So this is all the open source version of VS Code that you all know and love. So I can, for example, before I dive in, I can go to my extensions, and let us say I type Vim, and I can install the Vim plugins. I can go to my favorite theme, so I can type theme, and I can install the themes. So this is the same marketplace or the same extensions that you can install. You can bring your own extensions. It's the same as you would expect in VS Code. And what I can do quickly is, let us say we went to prompts.dart. And if I invite you to my repository, which I can do, for example, share, right? I can take share, and then I can type a name here, and then hit enter. And then they will be able to come to my workspace and collaborate on the workspace as you would pair program with your friend, your colleague, on their laptop or on your laptop. And we can then collaboratively build this application together. But let us say I invite one of you, and you're like, what is this prompt builder class? I have no idea what this does, right? And so what I can do is I can ask AI, I can select this code, for example, right? And explain, I can click explain the selected code in my editor. And actually goes through and explains all the parameters and what this means. And similarly, you can ask it to make some changes. You can also ask it to generate code for you. And there's something that we are still trying it out, and we have UI. We are still building out the UI bits. But yeah, at a high level, those are the main bits and pieces that I wanted to cover in my talk, which we go through in the slides. Just wanted to share this last slide. So yeah, thank you all for coming to the talk. Happy to take questions. For the last slide, which is obviously the hardest slide of the presentation, I just asked my app, how do I build a thank you slide? It told me what to do, and I hopefully did that correctly. Hope everyone enjoyed the talk. Thank you all. Have a great weekend and the rest of the conference. Any questions? Yeah, feel free to come and talk to me also after the talk. That's fine as well. Thank you all.